This is Colonel Dean Larley, and today, April the 13th, 2010, we're at the commemorative Air Force Nose Art section, and we're talking about with Ted Carpenter because he flew on the Easy Maid. So Ted, tell us about your history. Where were you born and raised?
I was born on a farm in Spencer, just out of Spencer, Iowa, and took my education all in country school. My folks farmed. My dad worked for other farmers. I went to high school in Spencer. I went to country school for the first 8 years, but then high school in Spencer. And I stayed around there. I did go to St. Louis. I did work in a small arms factory. I made 50 caliber ammunition, which I shot a lot of. I'm sure I shot some of my own ammunition because there was only 8 machines like it, and they were all stamped, and I shot ammunition of that same stamp that was on that ammunition. But then I got called to service, and I came home, and I was deferred for 1 summer to farm. And then that fall, I signed volunteer enlistment papers, and I went in January of that year or so. And I went to Farragut, Idaho for basic training. I turned 21 while I was in Farragut, Idaho. And I always thought, well, your 21st birthday is supposed to be something special, but nothing much in boot camp that you ever had special. So I just decided I never had my 21st birthday. But then I came home for 15 days leave, went back to Farragut, stayed there in an outgoing unit, and they transferred me to Memphis, Tennessee, to NATTC, to radio school. And that was 6 months. Then we took 1 month of special radar training. And then we was transferred to Jacksonville Yellowwater Gunnery School. And I think that was probably about 4 or 5 weeks of shooting live ammo from a 50 caliber turret. And that's when we volunteered to go with the PB-4Ys, because I was really trained to be in fighters on carrier base. But the Navy took over the B-24s and painted them blue and called them PB-4Y. And we were assigned a crew right there in Florida. We trained together, and then we went to California and we trained more. And I fired from the tail turret almost all the time, and which was quite a ride. I tell you, the first time I was in that tail turret, the doors behind me didn't want to close real good, and I was a little scared to turn it because the doors are supposed to open behind you, and if you want to bail out, you just fall backwards and fall out. You're free of the plane. But it was, I got used to it, because if you've ridden those turns, you have a high-speed button on them. And I remember one day I would run that thing, and there were stops. You'd hit the stops. And finally, the pilot said something about something sure shaking the airplane. It was shaking the whole entire airplane. But then as I got overseas, I went to the top deck turret. But we trained in Kaneohe, Hawaii. We flew from San Diego to Kaneohe, Hawaii. And then we flew from there. We landed at Johnston Island. We were supposed to stay at Johnston Island overnight. But there was a General Harmon. His entire crew was down in the ocean somewhere. He was a high-ranking officer, but they were searching for him. They had 100 planes looking for him, and they didn't have room to park us on that little bitty island that night, so we just took on fuel and took off during that night, headed for Eniwetok. And we were flying in a PB-4Y2 that we were just taking to Eniwetok, and another plane was behind us, following us. We were flying at 8,000 feet, and the clouds were at about 3,500 to 4,000 feet that night. Beautiful night up there. But PB4Y has to me, it was a discrepancy in the building of them, in that you transferred fuel from the auxiliary tank on the engine, or out on the end of the wing, and in order to save a little money, I suppose, they had the transfer line went right behind the carburetors of either, if he's on the left wing, it hit engine 1 and 2, right? It took engine 3 and 4. And I was sound asleep in the back end of the plane at the time. And all of a sudden somebody kicked me and woke me up and said, "We're having engine trouble." Well, that didn't bother me. I didn't even have my life jacket on. We were on our way to combat. We haven't even been there yet. But we lost number 3 and number 4 engine at the same time. We bumped air behind both engines. And it was a pretty exciting time in the plane. We fell in different stages. I don't know how many times the pilot would dive to gain airspeed, but we went through the clouds, got just like on a moonlight night, you get underneath a tree, it was just dark as could be. The other plane that was following us had his landing lights on, and he was following us down through it. So we had somebody, if we went in, they were going to be able to find us, because we never wore parachutes.
So tell us, go with getting the crew together in Florida and move up. I think we've covered a little of it, but let's start there.
We were matched, everybody was, I don't know how many of us that, well, at least the 8 of us went there, and each one of us would put in a single, no 2 of us from our company was put in the same crew. Each one of us drew a separate crew. Some of the crews had already been trained, and the pilots had been pretty well trained in Hutchinson, Kansas, and they came there to get together. And we've done a lot of flying in just squadron planes out of Jacksonville, Florida. We experienced quite a few things there. That one time we had to fly up to Fort Bragg, North Carolina and pick up a football team, and that was kind of unusual. It was not authorized, but we went. And we picked up some great big football players for a game, and we had an instructor navigator with us, because we had to fly out into the ocean and then turn and come into Fort Bragg and land and pick up these football players. We were the furthest one out, and our radio went out, and we were copying, but we couldn't transmit. And the navigator kind of got lost, and they were getting ready to go hunt for us. They thought we were down out there, but we were late getting into Fort Bragg. But we turned and finally came back to land and found Fort Bragg and went up to the tower and radioed back to Jacksonville that we were okay. So they called off the search that was getting ready to go look for us. And we had every message copied. The radio department had done a good job that day. But the guy who was in charge of the sending the messages didn't have them all down. He got into trouble. So the next day we were up flying, and here came a message across to I was taking the messages, and I got the message with our call signal that we had landed. Well, we were still airborne. So I right quickly handed the message to the first radioman, and he right away tapped out a message that we were still airborne. Well, what it turns out was the guy that was on the ground that got kind of in trouble because he hadn't kept all the messages. He was trying to get us into trouble that day. But that was the only time that ever happened. So we were lucky we were on our toes.
Let me interfere here with your message just a minute. How many words a minute could you send?
Oh, I was probably about 20.
That's what I did on in the Air Force, 20 words a minute.
Yeah, about 20 was good. And, I was trained to print everything because I was trained to be in a fighter. But we had typewriters on board. So I usually, when a message came to us, I printed it and then transposed it over to the typing. Because I just wasn't trained to take a message and type it.
Okay, you took training then. I'm talking on your tape, but I need to cover these points. You left Jacksonville and went to where?
We left Jacksonville and went to, wasn't Elliott, what was it?
Fair.
It's Miramar now in San Diego.
Oh, uh-huh.
And we trained there for quite a while again, and then we flew to Hawaii from that base.
Okay.
And I think we had something like 3,200 gallons of fuel aboard when we took off for Hawaii. And when we landed, we had 800 gallons left, because that was a reserve in case you had to circle.
Well, go ahead with your story now. Don't let me interfere.
Well, with Kaneohe, Hawaii, I guess I was a little naive at the time. I had no idea where Pearl Harbor was. Kaneohe is on one side of the mountain ridge on Oahu. Pearl Harbor's on the other side. And we were up flying one day. We were waiting for a towed sleeve to come up to practice on. And I was in the tail turn, and the ammunition, I always used to pull it up into my lap so the motors didn't have to pull it. But anyway, I looked over the side of the plane and I just see nothing but ships every place I looked. And I was just chattering away to the pilot, calling out this ship and that. And he said, just relax, we're over Pearl Harbor. I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was. But it was quite a sight from up in the air. I enjoyed that part. But we stayed there, it must have been, close. The plane we flew over there, they took away from us right away. It was a brand new plane from San Diego, and it was a silver one. It was a beautiful plane. But as soon as we landed in Kaneohe, Hawaii, the shore patrol came aboard and told us to get off the plane, pick up our gear. And I said, we got to put these headphones and stuff away yet. And they said, you leave everything. That's when we realized. We just flew the plane in there and it was put into a pool where if some squadron lost a plane, they could ask for another one. So we trained, and then we flew a PB-4Y2 out of there with a single tail to Eniwetok, and that's when we lost that, what was telling about when we lost power that night. We was flying a PB-4Y2. And we left that plane on Eniwetok, and I never saw it again, and I didn't care to see it again. So that was, but then we jumped in another guy's plane. We doubled up with another crew and went to Tinian. And then that's when we were right into the squadron. And flew from there the rest of the war, from Tinian to Saipan, once in a while to Guam. We flew 2 weeks down to the island of Peleliu, which is in the Palau Islands, and then we used our radar at night. We'd take off at sundown and fly till sun up the next morning, just using our radar circling the island of Babelthorpe. There was supposed to be 10,000 Imperial Marines on Babelthorpe, and I often wonder whoever went in and told those poor guys the war was over, because there wasn't a leaf on a tree or anything on that island you could see. Because they wouldn't surrender. They were, as I understand, the Imperial Marines were the largest Japanese people. They were bigger than most Japanese. And they said there was 10,000 of them on there. And we figured that they would be trying to get food into them with submarines and stuff, or they would be trying to take them out of there. So we circled all night long with this special radar. Our radar fit where the belly gun was. And so that's circled in there. So that was the special radar. We could tell if anything was coming in during the night. And we'd